Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a nice break, and I'll welcome you to our second session, Lifting the Veil on Wholesale is the title, and what can we better done about it than by telling the stories and different stories from the wholesale sector. And I'm very happy to be with you here today, and we have many very nice representatives from all kinds of wholesale sectors. We are starting with the pharmaceutical wholesalers, but there's also representative from the chemical wholesalers and the technical traders, and also from the cash and carry business. So thank you very much for joining us today, and a very warm welcome also to Christine Schreiber from the European Commission. She is director from the DG Grow and now in charge of the Ecosystem One. And there everyone is. So, but maybe a very important issue or point when it comes to Ms. Schreiber is that Christine was former director for SME policy with the European Commission, and as the wholesale sector is constructed by 99% of SME companies, I hope that we have a bit to also tell about SME policy and also the interests of SMEs here. So once again, a great welcome to all of you. During the last year, we faced many challenges in the supply chain. And the complexities of supply chain has become quite visible for everyone. Currently, we face huge challenges due to the various disturbances in the highly elaborated system of the International Division of Labor and the interdependencies of international markets. Wholesale is at its heart, and I'm very happy that we get four representatives from the sector, and Ms. Christine from the European Commission. However, wholesale, as you know, is not always visible to the public, and we are trying now today again to tell the story of wholesale and to make wholesale more visible, because we think and are convinced that wholesale plays a crucial part in the supply chain, and they can have much to offer, have much to contribute to the future, to the answer and response to the challenges that we face also with regard to sustainability and digitalization. And I'm very happy that we have quite a bit to hear about it today. Let me introduce our panel. It is Ms. Clara Salaridge, Head of Public Policy EU with Metro. And then there is Bernd Graber, President of GIRP, the European Healthcare Distribution Association, and he's also Director General of the Austrian pharmaceutical wholesale company Jacobi GM Pharma. Also, I would like to welcome Robert Späth. He is Managing Partner as SC Jekyll Chemie GmbH, and he's also board member of BGA and head of our sustainability committee within the BGA. And I would also like to welcome Jan Krückemeier. He's a vice president of BGA, but here it is even more important that he's managing partner of Krückemeier GmbH, technical trader. And last but not least, Christine Schreiber, thank you very much and that you join us today. As I said in the beginning, the best that we can do is to tell the stories directly from the companies. So I would very much like to invite Clara to give us an overview about what your wholesale business is doing and how you cope with the challenges of COVID-19 and what it means for your future business. You have the floor, Clara.
Thank you very much, Gergo, for the introduction. So for all of you who don't know Metro, we are an international company and a food wholesaler with customer focus on the hospitality sector. So HoReCa meaning hotels, restaurants, cafes, also catering establishment, as well as on independent traders. With that, I mean like the small retail shops we all find in our neighborhood. So our customer base is mainly small companies, I would even say micro companies with less than 10 employees. We are active in 34 countries worldwide and in 24 with our cash and carry business, 15 of them in the European Union. So Europe is fundamental for our business. I'm representing here Metro, but also in the panel, the food wholesale, the food service wholesale and the traditional cash and carry business. But the first thing I want to say is that this sector, the food service wholesale and the traditional cash and carry business, is in the process of transformation. This started, of course, before COVID, and this transformation is driven by customer demands, new needs, a highly competitive environment, and of course, other factors such as digitization. We cannot, of course, ignore that. And this means we are also, Metro as such, we are also affected by this transformation. Our slogan is, we always say we want to be the champion for independent businesses. This means that our business is now much more than just transactions. So basically, we are building up partnerships with our customers. So basically, we have evolved from being a transactional wholesaler to becoming actually a provider of integrated solutions for customers. It is not only, it is not anymore about just selling food or non-food products. It is also about providing digital solutions to make their businesses much more efficient. It's about food service delivery, consultancy and financial services, developing e-commerce platforms, so you name it. And everything with the aim of making our customers successful. We call it, this approach, the wholesale 360. So it is not only focused on pure transactions. And as I said, this is a process which started much long before COVID. And what we have seen is that during COVID, we can go deeper into this question afterwards, but having a strong custom HoReCa focus in many countries, our business has been deeply affected. And even if they say, well, you are a food wholesaler, people need always food, but of course the impact, if we compare to retail, has been completely different. But what we see is that after this period, because hopefully this is going to pass, this approach of being like a provider of solutions is paying off. And we are hoping, and we are actually expecting to come back to a post-COVID work, even with renewed forces, and seeing that this approach is actually rewarding, because it replies, like it answers our customers' needs. But maybe these are a lot of issues I just wanted to mention in the statement, and then we can maybe go deeper into that. Gregor, you're mute, sorry.
Thank you. And after COVID, I might find the microphone button to unmute myself. I have a couple of weeks, I think, to find the button. Sorry for that. Now, Clara, I'm sure that there's a lot of to discuss with all the different aspects, but we very much would like to focus on the stories that we have here. And before we come to our next panelist, I would like to ask the participants to write their questions if they have any questions in the chat, so we can react to them. Please name the panelist you are having a question to, so we can also integrate you in our discussion here. I would first go to Bernd Grabner from the Pharmaceutical Wholesalers, the president of the European Pharmaceutical Distribution Association. Bernd, please tell us your story.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to take part in this event and to tell a little bit about our daily challenges and the ones that we've been facing through the pandemic. So first of all, I think you mentioned that, Gregor. In my civil life, I would call it, I work for a pharmaceutical wholesaler, a family-owned one, and I'll come back to that later a little bit. We are based in Austria, near Salzburg, have a turnover of around 400 million and 400 employees. So that's a rather small one in our sector. And the association I'm representing today, GIP, is the European Healthcare Distribution Association. We are representing more than 750 wholesalers in 34 European countries. So it's not only European Union, but also other European countries. Our members run 1,260 warehouses with more than 100,000 products each. Probably we have more than 114,000 employees and distribute the incredible number of 15 billion packs of medicines every year, which means 62 million per day. So maybe that figure is a little bit clearer. We supply some 200,000 pharmacies a day and other healthcare professionals, of course. And just to give you a feeling for our service level, between the receipt of an order from a pharmacy or healthcare provider and the delivery, there is an average time of only 2.5 hours. So if you see a pharmacist and he says, okay, I do not have the product that you need in stock, but come back in 2 hours, it's us in the meantime delivering your medicine. Normally, one delivery contains more than 35 order lines, so rather small actually for, I guess, other wholesaling businesses. And we have more than 19 different manufacturers in one delivery normally. And of course, wholesalers in the pharmaceutical sector do not only offer the delivery of medicines to their customers, but it's actually much more. We call it, it's not as sophisticated as it seems to be in Metro, because the market is very segmented. But of course, it's not only the delivery of medicines, it's much more around like IT services, like training opportunities for pharmacy staff. We also do accounting, we do marketing support, so a whole bunch of services around. But when it comes to the SMEs that you've been mentioning before, I think our sector is probably one of the most inhomogeneous ones in wholesaling, because we have everything from a wholesaler running a single warehouse to global wholesalers running warehouses in every continent and also running big pharmacy chains. So it is from an association perspective and from my position in GIP, it's very interesting often to compile the interests of our members, but nevertheless, we've been facing huge challenges throughout the pandemic. I've been mentioning that before, and I guess, Gregor, that we will touch that a little bit later. So maybe I hand over back to you. Thank you for the opportunity to introduce our association and myself.
Thank you, Bernd. And of course, we will touch the topic later again, because it's a very good example to create the visibility of the role of wholesale and also the challenges that we faced during the pandemic. I would now give the floor to Robert Späth to tell us a little bit about chemical distributors and what he is doing with Jekyll Chemie.
Yeah, thank you, Gregor. As you already mentioned, I'm a managing partner of CSC Jekyll Chemie. We are located in Nuremberg. We are part of the CG group of chemical distributors, and I'm also in the board of the Association of Chemical Distributors of Germany. So let me tell you just some figures. Chemical distribution is on the very base of the supply chain, because we are dealing with basics like acids, dyes, solvents, or solids used for production, but also more sophisticated products. So there are basically two lines of product: the commodity business, as I mentioned, and on the other side there's specialty business like raw materials for lacquer and coating production and so on. So our company in Nuremberg, we are of around 100 million turnover and 130 people. The CG group, as the bigger group, is around 800 employees and for around 500 million and something. So the group is delivering 30,000 customers. So the customers are from very big companies from like the Siemens or big production companies, up to the very small companies like just the working people with little businesses. So the German chemical distribution business is a very specialized business. So all over the whole number of companies in the German association is just around 104 companies. It's not too many because it's a specialized branch. And there are a lot of SMEs and just a few big ones. So we have 8 companies of more than 200 million turnover, and the rest is smaller companies up to very little companies specialized in just a few products. So yeah, that's just to tell what chemical distribution. It's very broad, of course, and because we supply anyone who needs basic materials for the production. So it's from the automotive to the life science to the lacquer and coating to also pharmaceuticals, to all these and the food and feed as well. So it's very broad, and of course, well, I think later on we come to the effects COVID had and all these. But this should be the basics for the chemical distribution in the first lane. So thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Let's quickly skip to Jan Krückemeier. Many of the audience might know him because he is the head of our Committee for European Policy and always our face in the EU. Please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation and having me back again. Yeah, my name is Jan Krückemeier, and I'm representing the technical trade and wholesalers in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. Altogether, there's a turnover of 4.5 billion euro with 15,000 employees, over 500,000 customers. And the assortments the technical trade deals with is personal safety equipment, especially very important in Corona times, power transmission, industrial hoses and fittings. But I personally, I'm managing partner of the Krückemeier company, a family-owned SME that was founded over 70 years ago. We are having over 80 employees at several places throughout Europe. And we are specialized in abrasives and adhesive tapes. Abrasives, as you know, these are things to grind certain surfaces, or like from the tape business, you have an anti-sandblasting tape, or here for traffic signs to neutralize them on the highways. But also these kind of small things, especially for the summer season, because you can use them as on a foot file and just replace them, creating less waste because you don't have to throw away the whole file, but only the pad on it. Yeah, these are the basic facts about my association and my company. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan, very much for the very plastic examples of products that wholesalers are dealing with. Now, Christine, we are a very diversified sector, as you already have seen here, and it's quite hard to find the common denominator. Maybe the only common denominator is that it is B2B trade. And we are very happy that wholesale is part of the industrial strategy and also of the system of ecosystems. And it is also visible in certain ecosystems, however, not at all. I'm curious about what is your perspective or what is your perception of wholesale when it comes to the industrial strategies, and what are your ideas and what might be the part of wholesalers in the industrial strategy? And once again, thank you that you're taking your time. I know you're busy, and welcome again.
Yeah, thank you very much, and I hope I won't be too long, because I risk getting carried away. Then you stop me, please. Indeed, I mean the industrial strategy, or the update of the industrial strategy, was adopted in May, and you may all recall that actually a year ago, I mean a bit more a year ago in March, just I think a couple of days before Europe went into general lockdown, we had adopted the first industrial strategy, and together with it the SME strategy, and I guess we'll come to that a little bit later. I mean, fundamentally, I think there are a number of issues which are very relevant for wholesalers in this context. First issue is, of course, the single market. I think that's in a way also a common ground you all have in terms of interest. I mean, the functioning single market is crucial, and I think if anything, the COVID crisis disruptions last year have shown us how precious the single market is. So you will actually see that for an industrial strategy, there is, I think, almost a surprising big focus on the single market, and I think that's very important. I mean, you've probably seen also the proposal for the single market emergency instrument, which is significant. All the measures on the deepening also of the single market and services. So again, I leave it for these keywords, but I think that's very relevant for wholesalers. Then, I mean, you've seen one of the, I would say, new approaches in the industrial strategy is looking at, let's say, Europe through the lens of 14 industrial ecosystems. You are also aware that our DG went through a major reorganization, and this is how I ended up as director of Ecosystems 1, so which is actually covering 3 ecosystems plus a 4th one, I would say, which is chemicals, which is not an ecosystem, but which is actually very pervasive, I would say, contributing into many, many ecosystems. And here, let me just say, I'm very much aware, let me say upfront, that many of you are disappointed that wholesale has not been identified as a separate ecosystem. But I think you will also understand that if you have to divide up the European economy basically in 14 ecosystems, it's not obvious. And I think actually you are faring very well, because on the one hand, I mean, you are clearly identified as being part of the retail ecosystem, where wholesalers sell products to retailers, which then end up on supermarket shelves. And this retail ecosystem is one of the ecosystem, together with agri-food and health, which I have in my directorate. And of course, I mean, equally importantly, wholesale is part of a number of other ecosystems, such as construction, health, agri-food, low carbon, energy intensive industries, automotives, electronics. I think almost everyone, I mean, textile, tourism. So I think you actually have a very good mix, because I mean, every time wholesalers are selling a variety of inputs into production, or providing complete business solutions based on products which are sold to businesses. So I think here, I mean, this is actually in a way even the biggest share of wholesale business. So just to say, we have you fully on the screen in the context of the ecosystems approach. And we also aware, let me just say that upfront, that, I mean, wholesalers have been very heavily impacted by the crisis. I mean, in different ways, of course, depending on the areas in which people are active. I mean, partly it's basically the sort of disappearance of government orders. Partly for food wholesalers, it was closures in the hospitality sector. For the non-food, you had closures of relevant shops. And of course, for business relevant wholesalers, you had the overall slowdown of the economic activity. But I think it's also fair to say that many wholesalers have actually fared well, have actually proven to be a solution to problems. I understood many of you that, I mean, your role is to provide solution providers. And also, I think many have found, in a way, new ways of acting to address actually the issue of disruptions through their expertise and critical infrastructure. So let's think, for instance, about the chemical sector. So finally, about the industrial strategy and the relevance view, I would just like to mention the Industrial Forum and alliances and clusters. I think the Industrial Forum, as you know, will support the implementation of the industrial strategy. And here, I think wholesalers will be able to play a very important contribution in devising practical solutions to, of course, I mean, well, we all know these famous twin challenges, I mean, sustainability, digitization. So I think that is a relevant part. And then I would also like to strongly encourage wholesalers to explore possibilities to be part of the different industrial alliances and industrial clusters. So, I mean, industrial alliances are really interesting because their objective is to reveal opportunities and also bottlenecks. and they can really serve as an interesting platform to attract private investors and also discuss new business partnerships and models in a transparent way. And then finally, I think clusters are quite important. I mean, we will actually beef up the sort of the joint cluster initiatives to Euro clusters in the second part of the year, where really there are different ecosystems being connected across regions and sectors. And also, I mean, let's not forget, and that's linked to my previous responsibility, we have the Enterprise Europe network with different sector networks being very active in terms of matchmaking, finding customers, clients, etc. So I think all this is, I mean, sort of really in a very sort of short way are issues which I think crucial for wholesalers, and just to reassure that we have you fully on our radar screen.
That is great, Christine, and thank you very much for those words, and they mean a lot to us. And thank you also for pointing out the single market. I think that is really a crucial issue here. And I'm very happy that Bernd is with us today, because I would like to ask you the question, is there a single market for the pharmaceutical wholesalers?
Well, that actually is my first point. That would have been my first point anyway. Single market might be of importance for other wholesalers, but there is no single market for pharmaceutical wholesalers, because most of the products that we are distributing do have national registrations. I mean, the new innovative drugs, they do have European registrations, but that's only a very, very small part. So normally you can't sell an Austrian aspirin in Germany because it simply is not allowed. And this made it even more difficult when at the beginning of the pandemic, when there were the first general lockdowns. Of course, there was a lot of panic buying from patients, fearing that they would not get their medicine, mainly for chronic diseases, which led to days of 3 times the turnover that we normally had. So that was a very, very big challenge. And then in an early stage of the pandemic, there were supply disruptions that we did not experience before. We experienced other supply disruptions. I'll come back to that in a minute. But there were new ones actually for us, like border closures. You have to know that not every pharmaceutical manufacturer has a warehouse in every single European country. So sometimes Austria, for instance, my country is a very small country, and many pharmaceutical manufacturers do not have their warehouses here. So Austria is being supplied from warehouses outside of the country. And there were border closures at the beginning of the pandemic, which led to supply disruptions and put other challenges on us. But generally speaking, actually, I touched that before, shortages have been a huge problem for pharmaceutical wholesalers already before the pandemic. So you have to know that especially cheap products, you know, like the mask products against cholesterol or diabetes, all cheap off-patent products, most of them are being manufactured either in China or in India. So and there often were problems before the pandemic already. And this is why actually the European Commission, Christine surely knows that, runs several initiatives to somehow deal with the shortages and try to mitigate the effect for European patients. That's a major part of EMA's, so the European Medicines Agency's work at the moment, despite from all the vaccines topics that they have. Additionally, actually, wholesalers have been facing demand for products that we were not used to sell before, like masks or disinfectants were not part of our portfolio. But you have to know, I mentioned that before, that wholesalers for the pharmacies, for their customers, are some kind of one-stop shop provider. So basically, if a pharmacy needs whatever they do, they ask their wholesaler first. So it was a challenge actually to source these products because they were very short in the market. And again, there were border closures. Transports of masks have been stopped in certain countries, and the contents of the mask have been confiscated. There were scandals throughout Europe because of that. And Germany had export bans for personal protective equipment. All these things that are actually clearly against the European thought, actually. But I have to say, in the meantime, we've overcome this, fortunately. And supply within Europe is running smoothly again, actually. we have a new challenge that is vaccine distribution. But the normal supply is not worse than it used to be before. That is the good news actually for European patients. But we do have issues with the vaccine distribution in the meantime. I mean, this all happened on very short notice. If I can give you an example of Austria, for instance, we've been told by the middle of December last year that we should start the vaccine distribution as of the end of the year. And I guess you've all heard from the media that especially the messenger RNA vaccines need to be stored at -75 degrees and need to be transported under certain conditions. So this was something that wholesalers have not been used to before, and only a few of us have been dealing with products in such temperature ranges. So there was very, very little time. And of course, at this point of time, demand for ultra freezers, like we call them, was very high on the global market. So it was very, very difficult to get these devices for our warehouses. But as far as I heard throughout Europe, most of the wholesalers managed to get the devices, to set up the processes, and to start delivering vaccines in time. So in Austria, we have already supplied, I think, some 6 million doses to the market, which is, compared to the population of 8 million people, is quite a lot within this short period of time. And it also runs well in other countries. In Germany, wholesalers have started supplying pharmacies with vaccines. In France and in some countries, pharmacies even vaccinate people. So even here, there is actually, when it comes to healthcare, there is no European healthcare system. Europe's very diversified when it comes to healthcare because of the subsidiary principle for healthcare that leaves it to the member states' responsibility to organize their healthcare systems. This is why we had to adopt to very, very different challenges, but I guess most of our members did a good job. And in vaccines distribution, actually, the problem was the lack of vaccines, not the lack of distribution or wholesaling capacities. And one last point I'd like to touch, I think, Gregor, you mentioned that before, was the industry strategy. And let me mention that at the beginning of the pandemic, it was a big struggle for some pharmaceutical wholesalers to be recognized as part of the critical infrastructure. And even now, there is the directive to enhance resilience of critical entities providing essential services in the EU, and we have to struggle to be recognized as part of the critical infrastructure. Christine surely knows that. And even the ecosystem that you've been mentioning before, at the current stage, wholesalers are not part of the healthcare ecosystem, which is actually strange from our perspective, because if we don't do our job, nobody throughout the whole European Union will get his or her medicine. So if we are not part of the critical infrastructure, who else is? So I'm really asking, but as an association, as GIP, we are in constant contact with the Commission. And I think there is good chance that our sector will be recognized as part of the healthcare ecosystem. And actually, that's what is to tell about our role in the pandemic. Thank you very much, Gregor.
Thank you very much.
I'm not quite sure. Can you hear Gregor? I can't hear him. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
I think you're facing some technical. Yeah.
Yeah,
no,
you're just frozen. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Bernd, for your explanations. And what I hear from our National Pharmaceutical Distribution Association, I think it works quite well together with our government when it comes to the vaccine distribution. And I think the wholesale sector proves the great value it has due to the experience in distribution and how to deal with this challenging products, because it's complicated. Before I come to a question coming from the audience regarding Jan and Robert's businesses, I would pick up on the single market issue and also on the consequences of the COVID crisis, and come to Clara, because I know the cash and carry business was very hard hit by the crisis, and you also face major challenges in the single market. So I would give you the floor to maybe explain a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. Some points were already raised by Christine and Bernd. I have to say that at the beginning, if you ask me to say, I mean, I could say that we weathered quite well the storm, but there was a storm in any case. And in the first days, the first week, we needed to massively invest in operations, in arranging our supply chains. Border closures, it was mentioned, but it was also, I would say, like a factor which actually made us even reroute our supply chains. A lot of challenges in Asia even before we went into lockdown. So from I can just say that there was, of course, a lot of pressure on supply chains, but we have also realized that these worked actually pretty well in the last 15 months. As I said, we have to adapt our operations and logistics. The main impact was not that much on our operations, but actually was the consequence of the closure of one of our main customer group. And that's why also the impact of COVID on Metro, but also on food wholesale has been mixed. If I look at the countries where Metro, where the proportion of HoReCa customers is very high, I'm talking about Spain, France, Italy, Western Europe, we had months where our sales went down by 80%, and we are still recovering. So because also the reopening happened a few weeks ago in some countries. If we looked at other countries where the customer group was actually more retailers and even private, like independent businesses, which bought actually for private consumption in some countries at the beginning of the crisis because of the shortages, then the situation is different. So all in all, as I said, we weathered the storm, but of course we are still recovering, and we hope this will pass by. But of course, in the wholesale sector, in the food wholesale, was very different. It was, as I said, mixed. If we look at cash and carry, yes, we had the expertise and we could adjust. Also, in some cases, I'm not talking only about Metro, I'm talking also about other wholesalers, they open up to end consumers. If we look at the delivery service, which was booming before the crisis, this was much more difficult because, of course, all the contracts went stopped. So all in all, I would say there was a very important impact, and what we saw, and this is also the effort we did in the last months, especially during the first months, was to show that actually these sectors, or now as we call it, ecosystems, are very interrelated. If you kind of stop one link of the chain, then this is going to kind of had a knockdown effect on the whole supply chain. This is basically our main learning from the crisis. And but this also showed, and Christine mentioned that, yes, we could rely on our expertise, and we could rely on at least Metro as a big company, that we have a very diversified supply chain.
Thank you, Clara. I think that's a topic, the diversification of supply chains. I would like to pick up the question from the audience that was hinting to Jan Krückemeier and Robert Späth. The person is asking, what risk do you see that your vendors are selling their products direct to the market and so to your customers? What strategies do you have? So B2B business is by nature the one in between. So what do you do against the threat that someone is selling directly? I think that is also a challenge due to the transparency that digitalization is driving. What are your answers to that? Robert, do you want to start?
Yes, okay. This was a topic we already discussed a year or two ago, when all the platforms were rising and the digitalization made that possible. And of course, you ask if maybe someday Amazon is delivering chemicals. But in the end, it is a very financially intensive business, because you need very sophisticated sites to handle all these chemicals. So there are just a few sites in around Germany of companies handling commodities to do all this business. So there is such a lot of know-how at the wholesaler. And this is also a point I would like to mention, because I think the wholesaler is indeed some extra sector, because he's managing the supply chain. He has all the data and the know-how how to get supply, even if there are shortages in the market, even if there are problems, and he has all these abilities to really solve it. And he has, of course, also the possibility for storage. Especially if you look at chemicals, storage is a very important point, because most of our customers and also producers don't want to have storage because of all the regulations combined with dangerous goods storages and so on. So there's a really essential function of the wholesaler, and you should, if you want to establish now systems, and I think this is on the horizon for future pandemics or something, to have some security, how to deal with that, talk with the wholesalers and not with the producers, because the wholesalers may suggest solutions that will better work looking to the global market and the global supply chains. So I'm not afraid that digitalization or platform business would take our business now.
That is good to hear, Robert, and thank you for that. Then I would like to ask Jan first, and then Bernd to add their perspective on the, I think, very important question.
Well, actually, this is a very good and also question for the future. As Krückemeier, as a company, we focus to become much more specialized, and now not only are wholesaling and moving boxes from one place to another, but also converting the material that we deal with. So, because we are the experts in this field of adhesives and abrasives, and for example, I have some high-tech precise die cut here, and there are only some hundreds we produce and convert per year. For the producer, this is not efficient. So actually, it's in the supply chain, we are an important link between the industrial business and the producer. The second thing, and Robert already mentioned it, right now there are a lot of products and ingredients with a big shortage. There's a lack of it. But the industrial customers, they need certain articles and products. And since the producers say, hey, our delivery times doubled, sometimes it's 3 times as long as before you can get the product, they turn to us wholesalers and ask, do you have an alternative? Can you manage to get this product, either the original one from the same producer somewhere worldwide, or maybe you have some from some other producer. You have a product with the same features and the same qualities, and you can offer to us, because we need to produce. Now we have the demand again from the markets, from our end consumers, but we cannot produce because we lack certain ingredients, materials, or products in our process. So this is, I think, a very crucial point where wholesale shows how important it is for the whole economic system. And maybe Christine also might keep this for the future on her agenda, that maybe it's worth to have a look at the wholesale business itself as the crucial industry sector.
Thank you, Jan. Bernd, you would like to come in.
Yeah, That's actually funny to hear this question, because in our sector, direct deliveries are part of the normal business. So if you run a pharmacy, especially for OTC drugs, so the over-the-counter that are being sold without prescription, it is actually quite normal that manufacturers supply pharmacies directly. It's a matter of time, I guess, because in this case, deliveries are not short in time, and it's also a matter of money, because normally a manufacturer sells cheaper to a pharmacy than they sell to us. But on the other hand, wholesalers also have services like, in our case, it's mostly the financial service, because we pre-finance the stocks for, on the one hand, the manufacturers, on the other hand, for the pharmacies in between. That probably grants us our fair share for the next years. But what is becoming an additional problem is that in some countries, wholesalers do not have the right to be supplied. I mean, that's probably a regulation none of you has ever heard of. In some countries, pharmaceutical manufacturers have to supply pharmaceutical wholesalers in order to allow them to fulfill their public service obligation. But in other countries, like in Austria, this is not the case, which leads to the fact that especially innovative medicines are often delivered directly from manufacturers to the pharmacies, and that really puts our businesses at risk and in danger. And we are constantly fighting for this right to be supplied, or for the right to buy from manufacturers, in order to be able to fulfill our public service function also in the future. So maybe our sector is a little bit different and maybe further ahead. But I just wanted to let you know, because we don't have these strategies, because it's part of our daily life. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernd. I hope, at least in regard with the highly regulate, or with a high degree of regulation, that is not you're not ahead of the others, because we are very much in favor of less regulation. But there's a lot in the basket, Christine. And I would like to invite you, if you could share your thoughts about the topics that have so far been put on the table.
Yes, sure. And again, I hope I don't get carried away, so then otherwise you stop me. No, I mean, on the issue of the dependencies, which were mentioned, I think that is another, I mean, very important, I would say, component of the industrial strategy. Because of course, on the one hand, I mean, that's very relevant for you as a wholesaler. The EU is, of course, I mean, as a major importer and exporter, openness to trade investment is a strength and a major source of growth and resilience. But at the same time, I mean, we've seen now, particularly during the pandemic, but I think it's important that, as was pointed out by some, that you also had issues already pre-COVID. It's not like everything only, all the shortages only appeared with COVID. We have seen that we were particularly, I mean, vulnerable in our global value chains, specifically with regard to, I mean, non-European technologies or certain inputs. And that's why, I mean, Commission has coined this term, which is, I mean, carefully crafted, of open, I insist on the open as well, strategic autonomy. And I think one of the work which has been undertaken is really to carry out an analysis where these dependencies are, how do they function. And you may have seen the analysis which actually went through the trade data in all the different categories, where basically 137 products ended up being identified in sensitive ecosystems for which the EU is highly dependent. And this represents more or less 6% of the EU total import value of goods. And here, I mean, we're talking mainly about raw materials used in energy-intensive industries, of course, about active pharmaceutical ingredients. I mean, it will not have been a surprise to the pharmaceutical wholesalers among us here, but for me, for instance, it was a discovery, and for many others as well, that for such a sort of basic OTC like paracetamol, I mean, almost the entire amount of the active ingredient actually comes from India. And you remember that at some point in time in the COVID crisis, we're even worried about having shortages of this very basic, paracetamol. So when you actually many others, I mean, we're talking about chips now. I mean, but the crucial inputs for, I would say, also for our green and digital transition. So when you go through the analysis, you see that half of the imports for these dependent products originate from China, and approximately 1/4 are actually areas where we don't have necessarily the opportunities to diversify or have alternatives in terms of European substitutions. So I think it's quite major. I would actually like to invite you to if you haven't done yet, to actually read the staff working document where all this is explained. I have to say, for a commission document, I found it really, really interesting. And it's actually, I mean, very often, we always have very balanced documents, and, it's very politically correct. And this one is really a bit more like an academic paper, but a very interesting academic paper. And I would really encourage you to read it, because I think it really is an important also for our further reflection on that. So that's what I just wanted to say on the open strategic autonomy. There, of course, I mean, we are looking now how we can make sure that our supply chains become more resilient, especially also for, SMEs, let's face it, because for them it's much more difficult than for larger, integrated companies. And here again, we are using, European clusters, Enterprise Europe Network, etc. And of course, digital solutions, which were mentioned, such as industrial manufacturing data spaces, are important. But I would also like to comment on what was said in terms of, I think it's very important, it's for all the different sectors, but the issue actually of being providing added value, because it's true. I mean, you have different situations. I think it's interesting that we could contrast here the farmer sector, which on the one hand is heavily regulated, so less single market, but on the other hand, you are maybe more exposed even than others in terms of direct sales. But I think this issue of providing added value, looking sort of at providing solutions for customers, I think that's very important, and something which needs to be explored further in the context, I would say, of a deeper ecosystems analysis. And also, I think this, what I took away is that you are, part of the solution of actually also finding alternatives. I think is important. At the moment, in addition to my sort of normal tasks in the directorate, I'm also deputy to the vaccine task force, which was created by my commissioner Thierry Breton on the ramping up of the industrial production for the COVID vaccines. And here we are doing a very interesting exercise, not very typical normally for a public administration, where we are helping actually companies to find, those lipids or those 2-liter plastic bags which are missing. Again, some companies have their own ways and they will always find all the ingredients they need, but others are, so especially the smaller ones, have issues. And I think this is really, this is an exceptional situation now, and that's why we have actually created this task force, and we are working with the companies, and we did a major matchmaking event, but we always sometimes act as a clearinghouse. And we even had requests from some companies that they needed desperately 100 skilled workers, and whether we could help them to find them. So this is, I think, not a normal public administration activity, but here I think this is something where wholesalers can also play an important role in really finding, together with the networks we have, like EN and CAS, etc., to find alternatives. So I will stop here. Otherwise, I hope it's not me doing the background noise. I think my mic should be okay, but I hear some background, but I hope it was okay to hear me.
I'm sorry, Kristin. I left my mic open because of the challenges before. So thank you very much for the explanation, and dwelling also on the topic of the open strategic autonomy. I think that is very important, and very important. The global supply chains are very important. And I would like to focus on that topic now. Robert Späth, I would like to ask you, what have been the challenges when it came to disinfection? What's the name? Disinfectants. Because we had the shortages there, and I would be interested, what is your response to that, or the solutions to overcome future shortages, and what do you think about the ideas of getting the production back to Europe?
Well, it was a little bit chaotic, the whole disinfection business, because of the skipping of the biocides regulation to get more supply. But this had strange effects because a lot of people got into the production of disinfectants, and so the market was then had too many disinfections, but not according to the regulations. And then they closed it again so now you can only sell disinfections according to the regulation, and all the disinfection are still in storage that are not be able to use, and this is a problem for waste and so on. Well, but of course, nobody asked the chemical distributors. We had a lot of supply of disinfections according to the biocides regulation, and but nobody asked for them anymore because the others were very cheap and a lot of supply. So it got a bit chaotic, and I don't know. I hope there were no bad effects on health using all these things. So first get in communication with the wholesalers. I don't know how to establish it, but it would be good to get platforms how to get in contact in such a situation like the shortage according to the pandemic. And yeah, so this just for these disinfections.
Okay, thank you, Robert. I think we have to come to an end. We only have 3 more minutes left. One important topic that I would like to put on the table is I think we face a real challenge when it comes to how we build resilient supply chains in the future. Because I think everyone agrees that we have to diversify certain supply chains. And one major tool are the trade agreement that we have and that everyone is trying to negotiate at the moment also. However, the support from the public is lacking. And by putting the social and ecological agenda on top of the trade policy agenda makes the life very difficult. And I think it is opposing the idea of diversifying those international trade relationships. Now I speak as BGA, ask would be to keep this in mind and to not lose patience in negotiating new FTAs and, for example, Mercosur or CETA. But as I understand it, most of the challenges lie with the member states. But I think those trade agreements are crucial for diversifying the supply chains and making it more resilient. Sorry for taking the floor with that topic. Now I would give the floor to everyone for a final round. Clara, what are your asks for the Commission if you could wish for something?
So my ask, actually, Christine already mentioned that. I think keeping the single market open for an international company like us is crucial, but also to create, like we always say that keeping the single market open is the best stimulus package ever. And this is, of course, something we highly appreciate the efforts of the Commission. I also like the support for SMEs, and well, Christine, you are the expert here, or especially during the pandemic. Now regarding the recovery fund, of course, we know that the impact of the Commission on the plans of the member state is limited, but we need to make sure that actually those funds reach the real economy, and especially like the most affected sector. So that would be another ask from our side, maybe on behalf also of our customer base.
Thank you, Clara. Jan.
Yes, thank you. First of all, it's as Clara already mentioned, the open market, the open European single market is very important. And Corona showed last year that the transport from France via Germany to Poland is just not possible because borders are closed, and it takes too long and too much time for products and solutions to get from A to B within our European single market. So the importance, and as already Gregor mentioned, to have the agreements with other countries outside the European Union is very important. Like we are a typical family-owned SME, and we deal with over 70 countries worldwide. The majority in Europe, of course, but also the supply chains are getting larger and wider and more far away from here, which for a small company with 80 people, it's very difficult to handle, especially if there are more and more regulations. And the third thing is, please stop gold plating within the European Union, the member states, that you pass something for the EU and every country, no matter, I don't want to say, and even my own country, Germany, is not the best to prevent gold plating, to have an eye on that, and also sometimes raise your voice if you see that there's too much bureaucracy on certain topics. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan. Robert, the floor is yours.
Well, I totally agree to all that. The single market is very important, and it is still far away because it's still not open. So please open it. For example, if I think transporting waste over the borders, there are a lot of innovative business models according to circular economy, for example, but they are not possible through all this bureaucracy. And of course, the other thing is, if you now think about how to make supply chains more resilient, I think you really have to look out not to over-regulate also from the other sector according sustainability and so on. We are very strongly working on this issue for many years, but now there are some regulations. So maybe companies think to leave Europe and to have a easier going outside Europe. So you have to prevent this leakage as well. So have a look at the regulations. Do not over-regulate. Open the markets, because the markets have this tremendous function of a very good optimization of supply chains. And of course, the aim of resilience and the aim of sustainability, this I agree totally, but not via these more regulations. Yeah.
Thank you, Robert, very much. And now we come to the highest regulated market. Bernd, what are your wishes? More regulation? Your mic is mute.
You're right. This is one of my points. But first of all, again, the recognition of the role of full-service healthcare distributors as part of the critical infrastructure, I think, is absolutely key for us. The second one, as you mentioned, is a fair and monitored implementation of existing regulation. I guess the Commission knows that as well. And the third point I've been mentioning as well is addressing the issue of medicine shortages or the resilience of the pharmaceutical supply chain on a European level. I know that this is happening already. There is this structured dialogue that the Commission launched in April. I'm part of one work stream there, the resilience or the robustness of the pharmaceutical supply chain. So there is a lot that is going on at the moment. And I think Christine knows very well what I'm talking about, so I'll keep it short. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernd. So the final word has the Commission. Christine, do you have any messages to the wholesalers, to the audience?
Yes, I mean, I could also formulate messages to the Commission, but that might not be the right place to do it. No, I mean, on the single market, again, I mean, I fully heard you. You heard what I said at the beginning. And, you know, in a even previous life before SMEs, I was director for single market governance at a time when I would say the enthusiasm for the single market was rather moderate. We're always quoting Jacques Delors, who said, you don't fall in love with the single market. And I think if COVID has made one thing is that people have realized what it means if you don't have a single market. I mean, I'm not saying we have it all over now, but I think the complete disruption with the border controls showed us again, you know, on the one hand what we have achieved, but also how important it is to preserve it. On the gold plating, I couldn't agree more. This is something we have been struggling for a long time. You know, that in the Fit for Future platform, gold plating is one of the specific issues, the better regulation which we are addressing. It's always a bit delicate because sometimes member states will tell you they have very good reasons, but I think this is, I'm not saying that occasionally, I'm sure we also have European legislation which is excessive, but unfortunately many times the biggest problems for companies come from the gold plating. So I think at least this is now recognized in some member states. You know, we have invited member states to actually signal gold plating. I mean, we didn't get a lot of measures notified because, of course, member states don't like to highlight this. But I think there is something, I mean, movement happening in this context. And then in general, I mean, on the admin burden, indeed, I think this is crucial. And also, we didn't have time to touch upon this, but I think also for the future due diligence legislation in the pipeline, I mean, we will be watching very carefully that I think, very good intentions which are there to have more sort of sustainable supply chains and also basically showcase, I think, the European sustainable approach that doesn't sort of end up in an excessive burden. And I think it's very important. And we're just going through this now in the context. I'm also responsible for REACH, for the chemical legislation. I mean, we obviously don't want this to happen, that companies end up producing somewhere else and then the imported products come back because of legislation which is tightened up in a way in Europe that it actually goes outside. So I see you agreeing with me. That's good. And I'm counting on your, of course, input and very concrete input. And I would really encourage you that beforehand, please make sure that be it the industrial forum, be it sort of other opportunities to really, I mean, voice your concerns. I myself and my people, we are always very open, you know, to get input. And I mean, if we can find a solution, we always try to. And I mean, it's much more difficult now in these virtual times. Normally, I'm always a lot also in member states, you know, talking to companies, etc. Now it's all virtual, but we really need to get this specific, you know, input and feedback from you. And on the finally, on the dialogue on the structural issues in the supply chain for pharmaceuticals, I think this is really a major endeavor. I'm very glad that you cooperate in one of the work streams. So I hope that this is really a long-term issue, which independently of the current COVID shortages, I mean, this is a much more long-term issue also for therapeutics, that we can actually address issues there. So, I mean, thank you very much. For me, it was a very interesting, I have to say, exchange. I learned a lot from you as well. So I'm looking forward to continue the discussion.
Thank you very much, Christine. Nothing to add that I have. We feel our issues in good hands with you and try our best to provide all the specific information that you need, because we are aware that we only get into our goal when we provide the information for concrete policy measures. So thank you very much. In the end, what remains for me to thank very much also for that we can be part of the Industrial Forum as Eurocommerce. And me personally, we are very glad to share this platform, and thank you for establishing this kind of exchange and also to broaden the horizon and not only concentrating on the manufacturing sector, but also trade and services. Thank you for that. And then I would very much thank also Christelle Delberg and Laura Mack in the background also. Christelle Delberg moderated the first session for organizing this event. Before I give now the floor to Christian Verschuren for the closing remarks. Thank you very much.